So, welcome everyone who's watching the recording or has been able to join us live. Today, our goal is to take a look at our program of GIMP and coloring using doing line drawings and coloring in the GIMP program off of a photograph. And so this process is called rotoscoping. And we're going to be taking a look at what does it take in order to take a photograph and turn it into a nice drawing. So we're going to look at those steps and just make sure that you guys know how to do this. It's kind of a cool process. You can get some really interesting projects going on here. So this is kind of the end goal. Where we will end up at the end of this project. For me, I chose a goat as my final image. For you guys, you can pick whatever image you want as your second picture. Your first picture, your practice, should be the one that they sort of walk you through in the lesson, but we're just giving you kind of an overall kind of arc of what you'll do. So to start with, you will take your photograph and we will be using, that photograph in order to make, I'm just going to check to make sure we're all good. Okay. We're going to be using this photograph to create our drawing. So you'll start with your blank photograph open in GIMP. And if you don't remember how to do that, you click File, Open, locate the photograph, and then open it up. Some things to keep in mind when you're looking for a photograph, you want to get one that's pretty high quality. So when you're saving off of Google, make sure you click View Image As rather than just, saving the picture from that little small area. If you have a question about what that means, you can ask me, but it should be pretty straightforward as far as saving good quality pictures. I just want to talk a little bit about setting yourself up to have a good time with drawing and tracing. The things that you're going to really need to do this project well is you're going to need to be able to see the display navigation. You're going to need your tool options, probably your history so you can undo stuff easily if you make some mistakes, and your layers, because this is the first project where we're really going to be working with layers, and the layers are really going to help you do a much better job. So if you ever need help picking the tools that you want to have open, dockable dialogues tells you all these different ones that you can have visible, and all of these panels you can click and drag and move and rearrange your workspace so that it's set up in a way that makes sense for you and the way you want to work. For me, this is how I like it because I grew up working in Photoshop and this was kind of the standard default view there. And so for me, this is easiest because that's what I'm used to. For you, it might be something totally different. It might be your very first digital drawing program. And so, but I would recommend that you have display navigation, tool options, history, and layers all visible so that you can work with those very easily. So our goal today is to walk through starting with the photograph of the image, then moving on to create some nice quality line work, a basic color fill. So this is very basic coloring. And this is kind of as far as you'll go with the practice pictures. You'll get a basic color and a basic background. But then today we're going to really focus on figuring out how do we add interesting colors, shadows, and highlights in order to create a more dynamic and overall more successful image. And then that basic background color fill. So that's a very quick step that just makes it look like a finished image rather than just something sitting on a white background. So those are kind of the 4 steps we're going to walk through doing today. Okay, so starting on your basic photograph, you will need to find a paintbrush that you like and a color that you like in order to do your lines. And you'll need to make a new layer. So down here on the layers bar, yours might be in a different spot, but as long as you're clicking on layers, you'll see it. You'll click this little button that has that little asterisk in the corner, the bright yellow spot. That means new. So you click on that and it's going to ask you to give it a name, and you'll want to double check that we're always choosing transparency. Otherwise, when you color, like say I instead picked white, it's going to put a new layer that's a solid white color on top of my photograph and I can't see it anymore. So I don't want that. I'm going to delete that. And I'm going to make a new one that's transparent or clear so that it doesn't really look like anything's been added. It'll look like it's just a gray line out here, but that's perfect. That's what I want. That way I can draw, say with my, and it'll show up on top of my photograph without covering up the whole thing. Only my lines that I'm adding will show up. Of course, I don't want that, so I'm going to use my undo to undo that new thing. I like the navigation bar to be visible so that I can zoom in really close and move my box around and just kind of get in really close to do a good job with this. I tend to like to use like a 5 to 8 size brush when doing outlines, simply because I can get more quality as far as the line is concerned. If I go a lot bigger than that, say I have a 10 or 15, I think the standard size that it first starts out with is 20. The line that you get is really chunky, it's really clunky, and it doesn't respond well to details that you get from a photograph. And so the quality of your overall image when you're done is going to look like something an elementary student would do rather than something a high school student could do. And so I really would recommend that instead of having, you can use a thick brush in some places, but I would recommend doing your lines much smaller so that you can really start to notice those careful ins and outs of your photograph. So you really want to zoom in while you do this process and think about the texture that's being represented. The goat I have here has a lot of fur, and so I'm going to have a lot of like wiggly, jaggedy lines. But if I was doing something smooth, like, I don't know, a basketball or a cell phone or, a different kind of object, I would use a different quality of line to help show that representation. I kind of like the way that fur objects look because I don't have to be as exact and like hard straight lines. I feel like it's a little more organic and dynamic, but it's your choice as far as what kind of image you want to do. Maybe you want to do a car. Cars can be really cool and you can get some really nice smooth edge lines and have some really cool fun with that too. So this is really kind of your option of how to do this, but you just drag your mouse across the screen in order to, draw your lines. And I just did that really quick and I'm not doing everything. But we're not just going to go in the outlines. Like notice right now I just have the outlines. We also want to get the lines that tell us about the whole shape of the object. So in this case, the goat's arm, even though that was kind of hard to see, actually does, cross there. And then the chest and this other arm behind it, those are 3 different body parts. So we want to make sure we have lines that tell us about there. And we also want to double check before you get too far in your lines that you're actually drawing on that line layer. If you should be able to click the little eyeball and get rid of your photograph and be able to see your lines floating in that gray space. If you can't, that means that you did not have your new layer selected when you started drawing. You had the original photograph layer selected. And so your lines are not going to show up later on when we do the next step. So it's really important, just double check. Always have the layer that you're working on. That should be the one that's highlighted. So that you don't run into problems later. Unfortunately, if you start working on the wrong layer, there's not a good way to get it back without getting too complex. So I would just recommend that you're always double checking where are you working in the workspace, especially now that we're going to start introducing multiple layers. And that's really what this project really practices a lot of, is using a lot of good layers. So just check on that periodically. Okay, so continuing on with, hold on, okay, continuing on. So you got all your lines done. You've double checked. Your photograph is good. It looks awesome. You can see all your parts, but oh, look, that one I can see I forgot on this one. I forgot to add my line for the chest. Oh, I did not talk about color changing. if you are wanting to use black lines, you're certainly welcome to. Those are the colors that kind of start in GIMP, is it starts on black, and you're welcome to use black to do that. But if you want a different kind of color, you can click on this box right here in the bottom part of the screen, and there are some different options for how to choose your color. So I like this one because it gives me like the full range of colors sitting out here in, well, maybe I don't like that one. Hold on. Yeah. So I like this one because it gives me kind of a whole range of color. This one I like because you can kind of choose anywhere along this box and it'll give you a new color choice. And you'll see your current color listed here versus the old color. Say you wanted a slightly darker red than what you had before. So this would be your current. And now you wanted a slightly darker red, you could drag it to a slightly darker and you could see how they compare, how different they are, if they're different enough. Because it might be that it's too close to your original color for what you wanted to do. So if you want to use colored lines, not black lines, you are certainly welcome to do that and start playing with the color picker. That's something that you can do. And it's just important that you think about your color scheme for this final image. In that lesson that we had last week where you were reading about all the colors meanings, we also were choosing kind of a color scheme that went with it. So this one is a monochromatic. That means all the same color, but just tints and shades of that same color. So it's a monochromatic green. You could choose a monochromatic. I think that's probably the easiest for this project, simply because you don't have to do a wide variety. But if you wanted to use 2 or 3 colors, you could just pick a relationship and be able to tell me what that is as part of your final assignment. So we did all of our line work. So we double checked that that was completed. So I can zoom in and out. This is a really nice tool. If for any reason these tools ever gray out and don't let you move around or change sizes of things, I had that happen this morning. Simply close out of GIMP and restart it and reopen your image file. Everything should work again. If for some reason that doesn't work, you let me know and I can brainstorm some other ways to help you fix it. But I had that happen this morning. I was like, what's going on? So that is something you do want to double check. If for some reason these tools on the side aren't working, close out of GIMP, restart it, and it should work. Sometimes it just has an internal error. So we did all our lines, we double checked that we could see everything, looks good. Then we're ready to add color. So the same way that we added a new layer for lines, we're going to add a new layer for our base color, our color base. So I'm going to go over here and I'm just going to do it right with you. So this first one, I'm going to just call it color base. I still want it to be transparent. Okay. Now the one thing you want to double check is your layer order. You want your lines to be on top of your color. That way your lines will show up on top of your color. But I'm going to give you guys actually a little cheat here. Your base color, if you have multiple colors, you can use this method. If you are just going to turn in a project with a single base color, you cannot use this method because it is cheating. Rather, it works well, but you can definitely tell that it's been used. So here's our cheat method. I'm going to use this button here to make a line copy. This line copy now has the black and white lines that we've already added. And I'm going to use that line copy. I'm going to rename it. This is going to be my base color. And I'm going to now color fill using the paint bucket, my goat. And it doesn't get everything, and it only gets the stuff that are closed off shapes. So if you left kind of an open section, it would not fill that. And small areas it has a hard time figuring out what to do with. as well, so those don't work quite as well. The reason why I say don't do this if you're only planning on doing one color is that if you zoom in, you'll notice there is a little halo. There's this little bit of an area where you can see that it's not been colored in. Okay, you can see a little bit around the line where it hasn't been colored in. You can play around and add a little bit more color, and you could even do what I just did, which is paint in those lines. And now when the line shows up, it's better. But look, now it's on the outside of the line over here. So you need to be a little bit thoughtful with using that, and that you can use it, but you have to do a little bit of fixing so it still looks good, which means that now would be the time where you get your paintbrush using a size that makes sense. So in this case, I'm going to choose 10, and keeping my lines turned on, I'm just going to paint around the edges of wherever I'm seeing those little halo gaps. This is going to help my base color look really nice. And I didn't have to color every single little spot, but I do have to spend a little time here and go in and make that halo disappear. Because you can tell that it was paint bucket filled if you don't. Like, it's pretty obvious from your picture if you just do a paint bucket fill instead of spending the extra 5 minutes to go in and just clean up your edges. It saves you quite a bit of time, which is why I like it, but you don't want to do that for the whole thing and just leave it, call it good. Spend 5 minutes, finish it, do a nice job. So this would be if I had my, my pink goat or red goat, and you can do the same thing. Areas that are too small for the paint bucket to get in nicely without filling in that whole area, you can do with just your brush. So edge work and finishing nicely, that's key to doing a nice job with that. So that's the base color and our lines. So we kind of have those 2 steps, and then we're going to be adding 2 more colors at least to your main image. I chose to do highlights and shadows, and if you have areas of multiple color, say you've got something that has 3 colors built into it already, I still want to see at least highlights or at least shadows in each of the colors that you're choosing in your whole shape, because I want you to start thinking about the darks and lights of the image. And so to do that, we actually have to turn off our base color and turn on our photograph. Remember, to turn them on and off, you make them visible just by clicking the little eyeball. And so now I'm going to go in with another new layer. This time we'll just call it highlights, and with a color that's lighter than my original. So I could go pink with this, or I could pick another color. This time, instead of doing a monochromatic color scheme, I will do a different kind of color scheme. I'm going to pick a analogous color scheme. So I'm going to click colors that are close to each other, not shading or not changing the tint and shade, but changing the hue. So instead of red, I'm going to now have an orange, because those are analogous, so they're next to each other on the color wheel. And so now I'm going to color or add the places that are the lightest color, and this one I do not want to use the paint bucket to fill it, or I'm going to get those kind of crummy looking halos along all this detail. And because I have more dynamic lines here, I'm trying to capture the texture of the fur. I really don't want to have those halos to have to go back and fix. It would actually take longer for me to fix the halos on something that's so dynamic than it would just to be to color it in with a bigger brush. And so if things are smaller, you can do them quickly with your regular brush. And if things are larger, you can use a bigger brush to do that, to fill in the center. It'll be faster to fill in the center this way than it is to do that. But even just those 2 areas really quick highlighting, all of a sudden my goat looks a little bit better. Now, it's not totally done yet. I think it still needs some more work, but it's getting closer to looking good than it did when it was just a flat, boring goat. But those are kind of the steps that you go through. And then the very last step you would do at the end of the day is you would make one more layer. This one, call it background. Okay. And drag it to the very bottom of our lesson list. And our secret code is Pikachu. If you watching the video did not come live, you need to send me a message that says Pikachu, like the Pokemon. We are going to be continuing now, filling in the background with the bucket. Just click. It's going to fill in the whole background. You won't be able to see that first photograph anymore, but that's okay. Now it's finished. I would recommend that your background be a different color than your highlights, but I chose not to change it. In fact, I'm going to go back really quick. I'll change it a little bit. I'll do a yellow background. There. So now I have a little bit more dynamic interest going on in my goat. I could work on this quite a bit more and make it really, really nice. So this is what I spent a little bit more time on. I have more highlights and more shadows, more different highlights and shadows. But it's really up to you to decide how in depth you want to go. But I just do want to point out our grading scheme and grading rubric as far as making sure all of these things work well. So I'm going to switch over to, well, we're going to switch over here. Whoa, okay, so we're getting a little crazy here. So if we're over in our image design and we are over in our tracing photos, another word for rotoscoping, the assignment here, okay, here are the lesson, okay, the lesson of what we're doing. It should be 40 points. I'll go in and change that in about 5 minutes, but make sure when you're turning in your things, you turn in the traced XAF practice and save it as a JPEG too. And then your final project is the one that I'm just kind of walking you through right now. This is the trace a photo, and then color scheme here, you wouldn't call it color scheme. You would say, you know, green monochromatic or red, yellow, orange analogous, or whatever the color scheme is, okay, to show me that you understand what those are and you've applied them well. And just to kind of show you what you're going to be graded on, this is the rubric, okay? So the practice is less than half of the full project, so if you've only turned in the practice, you want to make sure you turn in both pictures. You'll have 4 layers visible at least, so preferably 5 or 6, right? So if the 4 layers, you'd get 4 points. 5 or 6, that's when you start to get the 5 and 6. Then line quality, and this is a rubric that is not necessarily, you know, if you just do base effort, those are 3s down the board. If you start to go above and beyond and you like do those extra details and you have those fine qualities, that's where you get that 3 and 4. And as you know, the background, if you add multiple colors, then you can start getting above good. So that flat single fill background, that's a good background. You can always do more work to get a better background. So I hope this helps you out with as far as what we need to do today and this semester. Hold on, let me get back to our lesson here. Where'd it go? Okay, here we go. As far as what we're doing this week, if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you for coming out or watching the menu.